Hello, I'm Rachel Richards and welcome to Teenagers Untangled. As a former BBC correspondent, parenting coach and mother of teenagers, I've turned my skills to researching the issues involved in raising teens. With us to share the pain and give us a mindfulness perspective is Susie Asley, qualified mindfulness coach and parent of 3 teenagers. Hi, Susie.
Hi, Rachel.
Coming up later in this episode, Sarah has asked us to take a look at how we can educate our teens to eat healthily without the risk of them developing an eating disorder. But first, Nikki has written to ask if we'll take a look at screen use. She feels the boundaries shifted massively during COVID and now finds getting the balance right is very hard. She wants her teens doing other activities and engaging more with the world rather than simply having to put time limits on their devices. Now, I started out by trying to pin down some reliable facts. There are lots of headlines, but when I dig behind them, they're often small sample studies and what I would consider clickbait because they feed on our fears. But I'll go with one older survey from 2019 by Common Sense Media, a non-profit organisation which has a wealth of information for parents. They found that for older kids aged 13 to 17, the number of time on their screens has climbed to 7 hours and 22 minutes, but that was even before COVID really struck. What happened in COVID, according to Educational Technology, is that the majority of time spent on screens shifted from being, something to do with learning to being much more social and entertainment driven. Susie, do you have issues with screen time in your home? How do you, as a mindfulness coach, perceive it?
It's a minefield. Yes, we have issues. I have 2 boys and a girl. My boys are quite into gaming, especially the eldest. He's a big gamer. He loves gaming. And, during COVID, and I know that I'm absolutely not alone in this, I was almost encouraging them to go and game because that was how they got their social contact. Obviously, that has changed and they don't need that anymore, but we've got sort of stuck in probably gaming more than otherwise would have been. And my daughter is she doesn't game. She does a bit, but it's different. And maybe her screen time is a bit more passive. She's on her phone a lot, talking to friends, but she'll maybe watch TV more, which is more sort of passive watching as opposed to engaging and actually being sociable through her headphones. And I find it confusing because there's a presumption that screen time is bad, end of. And maybe it is, but we don't know yet.
Or maybe it isn't.
Maybe it isn't. Questioning that presumption, I do that. And I'm thinking, well, I can see there are downsides to gaming or to being online. And I can also see there are positives. But the reality is we don't have long-term studies of what this generation will look like from having so much screen time. We just simply don't know. And I don't know whether, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just, it sows seeds of doubt in my mind when I'm trying to navigate it. We just don't know. And I think social media is brilliant and gaming is so much fun. They love it. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is getting stuck in it.
Yes.
When we can't get off it and do anything else, myself included, because, it's designed to draw us in, isn't it?
And that's a really good point, because Common Sense Media says we need to shift from evaluating the quantity of screen time to the quality of the content and what's actually happening when we're looking at our screens. And when you talk about the getting stuck, that's the one area we do know a lot about, because we know that these companies that are trying to attract people to the screens spend a huge amount of money on the best minds in the business and how you actually get people there and keep them there. So according to the Harvard Education Review, social media apps use variable reward schemes, which were introduced by psychologist B.F. Skinner in the 1930s. And in his experiments, he found that mice responded most frequently when they couldn't guess when they were going to get a reward. So humans apparently are no different. And if we perceive a reward to be delivered at random and checking for the reward comes at very little cost, then we will check habitually. And programmers know this, and they are working very hard behind the screens to make sure that we keep checking, because eyes on screens means money.
Yes.
And the rewards that they're talking about are oxytocin, which is that love hormone, that molecule of social connection that we release any time there's a tweet or a message, or it tells us that we're actually interacting properly with someone, even if we're just reading a message on social media or Dopamine, any positive social stimuli can result in a reward of dopamine. And those results tend to be short term. So they create an addictive feedback loop. So you get the dopamine hit and then you need another hit to get it again. And most apps are optimized to encourage you to keep compulsively checking for notifications to get that dopamine hit. And then the cortisol, the fight or flight hormone, comes in because if you're the type of person who's been doing the checking regularly, like the dopamine hit every 15 minutes or so, if you put the phone away, then after a bit, you're going to end up with a cortisol rush because you're a bit fearful that maybe you're going to miss something.
Oh, God.
And then to get rid of the cortisol rush, you'll go back to the phone to check it. Yeah. So this is what's happening behind the scenes. Yeah, it's exploiting it. And Instagram even has notification algorithms that sometimes withhold likes. I spoke to my hairdresser the other day and she'd been doing these reels, which are really great for people who want to understand how to do their hair. She's lovely. And she said she'd done this reel and spent ages creating it. And then when she put it up, she hardly had any views. And she thought, what's going on? And so she kept checking. And then suddenly there was a big amount later on. And and when I spoke to her about this, she said, because Instagram withholds some of the likes and the views so that you keep checking and then they'll give you your hit. Ugh. Because you're primed now to feel much more excited about getting that. And then you'll keep coming back to it. Of course. It's amazing. It's amazing how these things work. And I think understanding that helps.
It really helps. And teenagers can understand that. I think I was talking to my son about it yesterday. He gets that. I mean, there's one thing understanding it in your head. And then there's another thing, not following it. That's really, really difficult, especially when they are doing that deliberately. But knowing it, being aware of that is really helpful.
One of the really positive things is the use of the internet to hunt down things we're interested in.
Yes. So I try to, my screen use needs looking at. I try to use social media. I mean, I use it for my work. I use it quite a lot for work. It's really helpful. But I also try and follow people who I think are interesting and that I have learnt an awful lot from social media. And I think it's amazing and brilliant.
And you meet people in areas that you could never possibly...
Absolutely.
You message them and they message you back.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
How does that happen?
I know.
How is little me able to talk to these people? Yes.
It's fun. And it's really, really good. My son, I was talking to him last night and he knows loads about particular topics in the news that he's interested, people who are, doing interesting things and stuff that he's interested about. He will sit and, read and listen, and it's on TikTok or wherever it is. And he's really, knows a lot about it. So it's really good. Again, the problem is when we get stuck in it. And also another problem, I think, is the good old comparisonitis, which is the toxic part, isn't it? It's the bit where we see everybody else having a lovely life and, get FOMO and, teenagers, particularly girls, but I'm sure boys as well, I don't look like that, all the toxic stuff.
The problem with the social media is it completely amplifies that because everybody's living their best life online. Yeah. And so all you see is a stream of people who are going to amazing holiday destinations and looking their best, which is, 85 to 90% of the time, we don't look our best.
No.
So most of the time, nobody looks like that. But it's even hard to step away from that and get that in your head. And the number of research studies have been pointing out that this low self-esteem is correlated to time on social media because it's linked to increased feelings of loneliness, anxiety, depression, envy. It is a problem.
Yeah.
So certainly having conversations about it can be really helpful, and talking to them about the stuff that you've been saying, where if you encourage them to hunt down things that genuinely interest them,
and also maybe encourage them. And I'm just thinking aloud, to follow particular people, because there is a pushback against some of this. There's now an awareness of all of this, how toxic it can be, and there are loads of people on Instagram or wherever you follow who are against that and who are trying to present normality, whether that's body image or being a parent, or for the adults, but trying to show what does a normal life look like.
Yes, and finding really communities, communities of people who have interests like you.
Yeah,
it's very enabling, and actually one of the great things about COVID, ironically, is that people who are disabled or unable to leave their house, agoraphobics, all sorts of other people, found that it was a really great, that for the first time in their life, they were able to connect with people because it was online.
Yeah.
So this move to online has benefited some people.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, there is so much, and I think it gets labelled as just being negative because we're frightened, because we don't know what the effects are, and maybe the fearmongers are correct. But we just don't know.
Yes.
But there are definitely positive things in it. So if we can pick them out and embrace them, and then maybe, I don't know, set limits, as to, I'm talking about myself here and my own children.
Or I have some research that will help us with that.
Set limits on it so that we're not, we're doing other things. We're connecting properly rather than just through the screen.
And I think that's another thing that's happened because of COVID, is because we've actually got out of the habit of saying, oh, I'll meet you for a coffee, or organising parties, or going out to go and do other things, because you think, oh, well, actually I could just stay at home.
Yeah, it's comfortable. Yeah.
Yes. And so if you're not a massive extrovert, it can just feel much easier not to bother. And I've had to check myself. I've been texting someone and then thought, for God's sake, pick up the phone. Yeah. And the conversation is so much more enjoyable, funny and fun. And what I did notice with my daughters during half term was that when we would get together, we'd be a big family with another family, and we'd get together and all the kids were on their phones. And my older daughter, who's very disciplined about her phone use and doesn't really, she can see the problems, turned to me later and she said, you know what, everything's online now. I can't, I have to exist online, because she wasn't on Instagram. She wasn't on these other things. And she said, I don't exist for this generation if I'm not engaging in those platforms.
Yeah, but we still don't know what that means, because every generation has the adults go, oh, you're doing too much of that. You mustn't do that because you'll end up, where will this end? And each generation goes, yeah, but it's fine, just chill out. And I don't know. I'm just, there is the part.
I think it's a very good point. What I see when I see this happening is I see us shifting to what Mark Zuckerberg wants, which is this metaverse where we're all living online. And I think the point about humans is that we have something that computers don't have, and that we need to teach our children to channel that and get in contact with that, because that's what will define us and make us different. And when it comes to the work environment that they're going to be in, that's the thing that will trump the computer age.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that. I just think maybe that would be a phase. I don't know.
Absolutely.
And then they'll find their own way in it, possibly, don't know. But there's an uncertainty in it, isn't there? We don't know what
we don't know. We don't know. So rather than panicking, we need to just find ways of channeling things.
Yes.
So what to do? Psychology Today had an article on it that I thought was one of the better ones. And they said, look, teens need practical guidance on how to disengage. We need to parent them. I love these talks because they make me go back into, okay, where am I with this? Not doing very well. When we first set up their devices, we're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm limiting their screen time. And my children were brought up in a very offline environment. And suddenly I realized, looking at them now, that the older one has done all the pushing, and she's got very healthy habits because I was very careful, and the younger one has just snuck in with her massive usage. And I suddenly looked and thought, oh my God, she's online all the time. And so I've realised I have to go back to her and think, okay, let's go back to what's happening. And I said to her, so let's have a look at how much time you've spent on TikTok. She was horrified because she knows that her use of TikTok isn't really giving her a huge amount, and it's not actually, it doesn't feel good.
No.
So for her, that those 10 minutes you thought you spent on TikTok that turned into 3 hours, is not making her feel good.
No.
So we need to somehow interrupt that process,
because it can feel good for a bit. I mean, I did try and teach my younger boy particularly, who really gets stuck in it. What does it feel like when you're in it? So sort of from a mindfulness way, noticing you're on it, and it's actually really fun for a bit. And I'm the same. It's lovely for a bit, and then you reach a point
where you've seen 7 pictures of otters.
Yeah, and you start to numb out, and it feels a bit ugh. Yeah. And at that point, or he was gaming, and he was getting really raged by that particular game. At that point, when can you notice just before that kicks in, tune into what's going on in your body or your thoughts, whatever, and then take a break. Unfortunately, the draw of, I found with him anyway, the draw of the social media is because they are, as you were explaining, they're deliberately trying to get you to stay on.
You're up against it with these.
It was too much to fight against.
I think that's a discussion to have when they're not online and when you're having a sort of, okay, let's have a think about what's going on here. What do you want? Because rather than imposing upon a teenager a regime, we need to have a sit down and a discussion about what they're trying to get out of their lives when they feel at their happiest. And if that is spending a lot of time online, rather than saying, well, you're wrong, looking at why it is that they get so much out of that. And one of my friends said that she'd actually had a conversation with all the other mothers and said, okay, so the gaming time is between this window and this window. And she could then say to her son, well, you're not missing out because your mates aren't online.
That's a brilliant way of doing it. I think for younger teens, I think my 17-year-old would be like, why are you talking to my friends' mates?
Stop,
you don't even know them. That's weird. For younger ones, that's a brilliant idea. And I did have a conversation with him. I remember saying, tell me about the gaming. What do you get out of it? And he was really adamant. He got a lot out of it in a really positive way. It was sociable. It was exciting. He felt he was learning. He ramped it up massively to try and win me over. But that his for him, there were loads of positives in it, and that was quite interesting, actually.
It's just reminded me off the top of my head of a study by Dr. Eric Sigman. When you're gaming, the levels of cortisol go up and your body has a release of the sugars so that you can run, because it's a fight or flight hormone. And yet all you're doing is staying sedentary. And that's actually not very good for us. So the interesting question is, should we be, breaking it up? They're gaming, then going out and doing something that involves some exercise. It's how sedentary are we as a result? Yeah. One lady I saw had a son who was on his Xbox and YouTube all the time and then behaving appallingly, getting into rages, treating his family badly. And she said, oh, I don't know what to do. And everyone said, take them away from him. And he was transformed. And then she was saying, I don't know, should I give it back to him? Well, we need to have some real discussions in that situation, because you've then got somebody who's got a problem managing it. Yeah. If your teenager's performing well at school and they're otherwise well adjusted, it's more about just managing it, isn't it?
It's hard though.
Very hard. Now, setting screen time, Android and Apple devices have screen time features that indicate how long one has been using the device. You can actually go onto these phones and set screen times. For the younger ones, you can actually put a pin in that you put in so that they can't override it. Yeah. And I know one of my daughters has a friend whose parents has put these in place, and she marches around going, I can't watch any more films. And she's furious. But the point is, if her parents hadn't done that, she would then have been spending all that time. All right, now she's marching up and down corridors furious. But the point is that she would then simply not come away. She would be spending huge amounts of time. The question with that is, rather than imposing the time, it's sitting down with your teenager and saying, okay, so what do you think is a reasonable amount of time? And negotiating it, and then saying, okay, let's set that and we can come back and review it in a week or so time.
I think that's a great idea. I've tried doing that because I do want mine to be less on. I think particularly one of them is on way too much. It hasn't worked for us. I don't know whether we haven't followed through, or they can, the idea of, that sounds like a really good amount of time doesn't really work in reality for us. I mean, that could work because then they're suddenly in that game or they're suddenly doing that and, well, let's do it tomorrow, or I'll start tomorrow.
Right.
So it's hard. I don't know. There's one thing having a great idea, a good theory, and they can even go, no, it's brilliant. I don't want to be so much on my phone or whatever they're doing. But when they're actually stuck in it, then it's really, really hard to pull them
Well, it's very interesting because I have tried that with myself and it works very effectively.
Right. You're just more disciplined than we are.
Well, because what happens is the phone switches off and I can't, okay. It will stop you from accessing things. And I have the pin, so of course I can change it. But what it does is it concentrates my time effectively. So I then think if I'm going to be on social media for this time, then I need to be effective during that time. So I'll have my social interactions. I'll check this, check that, and I'm off.
Yeah.
And it actually then concentrates me on doing things that are really enjoyable rather than scrolling.
Yes, and then I guess when you're doing it for yourself, you have buy-in, don't you? You're doing it for a reason. You want to be less on social media genuinely, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. Whereas maybe it's different when we're discussing it with the teens. They maybe know in their heads they ought to not be on it so much, but actually they really want to be on it. So they're going to get around it.
I think it needs to be it doesn't happen just once. It's an ongoing, okay, let's try this.
Definitely.
How do you feel about it? And actually studies have found that FOMO and feelings of anxiety associated with constant connectivity drop off when you do limit the time.
Totally believe
because
that.
then they just know that it's not, they've had that limit and now's time
and then
to
they
do
have to
something
find
else.
something else to do. Correct. Which I find has been the difficult thing for my kids, because when you're gaming or doing things, on social media, it's really the reward is immediate and it's really big deliberately, as you've explained. So for trying to find another activity that matches that is almost impossible. So there's like a drop in interest, drop in excitement. Nothing matches to the excitement of, blitzing a whole people online.
Dopamine, oxytocin, and cortisol.
So going to bake cookies isn't quite as fun.
Well, we do need to find things that do give those hits somewhere else, those rewards.
Or they get used to that it's just a different way of being.
Yes, absolutely. And understanding the benefit of it. So in other words, with my kids, what I have done is when they have been online for long periods of time, I then say to them, so tell me what fantastic stuff have you been doing? I'm not being facetious, just give me some stuff. I'm really interested. And most of the time they can't tell me what has happened, what conversations they've had. There's nothing. It's blank. And I personally, this is literally no research about this at all, is I feel like when people are scrolling, what's happening is their brain needs some downtime. So they've started scrolling to give themselves that brain downtime, which is the same thing you'll get from going for a walk or just doing something repetitive, those mindless activities. But their mind isn't switching off because they're constantly being stimulated. So it's mimicking that, but it's not doing any of that at all. So it's actually makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. It just doesn't feel good. Yeah. So I have had conversations with them about that, and I am getting a lot of buy-in now because they understand, because I talk all the time about it. But I also think as a parent, we need to buy in too.
Yes.
So if you're at the table and it's supper time and you've got your phone out, then this is the big. And my Father Christmas one year gave my husband a phone cage, which was marvellous. I looked at it and said, "Oh, darling, that's a really great idea." And that went in the middle of the table. Brilliant. And every time his phone went out, it went in the cage. Yes. And the kids thought that was hilarious. Yeah. And it sort of interrupted that mindless. And the worst thing is, what he's doing is reading the newspaper. Most of the time, his stuff on his phone, occasionally he's playing, a game. But we know if he's playing a game because it's turned horizontally. So that's an easy one. Heyday. It's always Heyday. And then the other one is basically going through all the newspapers. Yeah. Rather than allowing that to happen, we are now buying newspapers so that he can sit and read a newspaper in front of my children, because otherwise they don't know that that's what he's doing.
No, they just presume that he's doing what they do on their phones. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I said to my daughter when we'd had a bit of a row and she wanted to make it up to me, I said, okay, you can make it up to me by reading the broadsheet downstairs and telling me about a story you find that's really interesting. And she did. And the story was fantastic. And at the end of it, she said, God, I found that really interesting. And I haven't really understood why people do that. And sometimes you've just got to interrupt the flow of where they are and just correct it so that then if they go back online, they may now be looking for information sources rather than looking for what the makeup is that's fashionable at the moment.
Yeah, no, and which can be fun for a while, can't it? But I love the idea of having actual newspapers, because they don't, and the idea that they presume what we're doing on our phones is what they're doing,
of course,
because that's what they're doing, and we're probably not half the time. We're doing work, and
well, and that's the other one I saw, which I thought was fantastic, which is narrating what you're doing. And to the point of irritating people. So the thing is that they see you on Instagram and they think, oh, she's on Instagram, I'm on Instagram. But what you're doing is something completely different, because you can say, right, so now what I'm doing is I'm answering somebody's question here. Now I'm posting a thing about the research that I've done. And now, and then you can pull out your phone and you say, so now what I'm doing is I've got the calendar up because you've got a dental appointment in 2 weeks' time. And I need to put in some notes in my diary for you to, and so that they can see that what you're actually doing is not scrolling. You've basically got a very, very busy life managing a million people's diaries.
Yes.
And that
do they not tell you to be quiet?
Well, they can try, but I can say, okay, fine, you do it.
Yeah.
Because the point is that then they start to understand that life, what you're doing is not chilling.
Yes.
That in a way, it also creates compassion, because they can see that you're not actually having a fun time necessarily.
Just
what you're doing is you're actually trying to run your life, because there was a book I read called it The Me Machine, that we're all walking around with our phones. But yours isn't a me machine if you're actually using it for work. It's basically a management machine.
Yeah.
And so as long as they can start to see that that's what adults are doing, then it starts to shift the debate and the discussion.
Yeah, no, definitely. How we use our phones is super important. I'm going to take that up to review today.
And you did bring up the very, very pertinent point, which is, what are we supposed to do when we're not on our phones? And there's a really fantastic link that I found, which was on parentingteensandtweens.com, which was 50 screen-free activities. And I actually thought they were really good. Sometimes you think, oh God, they're just filling space in a
they're lame ideas. They're not going to want to do that.
Really good one. So I'll put that in the podcast link. But they had game nights. They had Nerf gun war, organising and rearranging your room, geocaching, reading, having a massive clear out. It doesn't always have to be about a dopamine hit. It actually could be about, look, you actually need to live in this environment. Should we clear out all the stuff from when you were young and give you an image, a new image?
Yes.
I've had an evening where my girls went into my wardrobe and tried on all my clothes. And we did a whole,
Brilliant.
What's the image you'd like to have this time? It's fun.
I get my boys to do that.
I think that's a really good idea.
That could be really fun.
But you see, it could be hilarious. When they were younger, we used to actually put the music on really loudly and dance around to it.
Yes.
Now, that may seem really lame when you're a teenager, but you could say, okay, what's your best hit? We want to listen to it for this amount of time. And suddenly they're off their phones and you're all talking about music and you've moved.
That's really lovely. That's a really good way of doing it. Because I think sometimes we kind of we fall into our comfort zones, don't we? It's really comfortable just to sit and be on a screen because we're not actually doing anything. It's really passive. And to step out of that takes a bit of effort to do something else. So often they're like, oh, I can't be asked.
Because we're all tired.
It's just easier to sit here. But we know, if you put a bit of effort in, then actually, you get energy out of it as well. But it's getting into putting that little bit of effort into stuff
and then reinforcing it afterwards by like, how are you feeling right now? I feel a bit sweaty and fun. It was great. And my kids, when I do things like that, they love it. To finish this off, the things that are suggested are setting down times for device use and up times. So you can say, so these are good times to use your device. So here are the down times during meals, hour before bedtime, meeting people. Restricted use in the morning. Don't use your phone as an alarm clock. Don't look at it first thing. Treat yourself to something much more interesting, like a coffee, or walk around the garden, or whatever you can do. Look out of the window and just breathe the air. Something different rather than frantically reaching for your phone and checking what's been going on.
It puts our stress hormones right
instantly. Taking a proper lunch break, which we will come to in our next section, and avoiding screens before bed. So really selecting times when you can have a downtime and saying, right, we all agree that that's going to be, and you can either have, selective downtime or a complete detox. If you've got a point where there's somebody in the house who really can't manage, who is exhibiting distressing behaviour, there are people can support this, but really they need to be away from the screen.
And one thing we can do, and I love it, it's a mindfulness thing, it's called urge surfing, and you can use it with anything, but it's really good for digital. And it's when you feel the urge to pick up your phone or whatever it is you use.
Or wine,
or a massive bag of sweets. Then you notice the urge and then you don't act on it, and you give yourself like 10, 15 minutes, you time it, and you say, right, in that amount of time, 15 minutes time, I am allowed to do. I'm going to allow myself to do the urge I'm feeling right now, but I'm going to make myself wait. So I can do it, but I don't have to. So you're not saying I'm not going to do it, because we resist it and we fight, and that's a whole different way of doing it. So you do go do something else, and then after the 15 minutes, quite often that urge has passed, or it hasn't, or you consciously choose, no, actually there is something I really need to check on my phone, so I am going to consciously pick it up, do that. But it's just a very different way of approaching it. Or
a speed bump in the road.
It's a speed bump.
Nice,
yeah, it's a good one.
that.
But you're tuning in, you're noticing the urge firstly, then you're putting it away and giving yourself permission to do it. You're not, restricting yourself massively. But you're allowing that urge, which is often a reaction to something else. It's a discomfort from something else. Something else has happened. Oh, I need to check. Oh, I need a glass of wine because I've just had a horrible conversation. You're reacting to something. So if you can allow that reaction just to pass and then decide what you're going to do, it's a good way of doing it.
Absolutely. And then finding the other rewards, things you could be spending your time doing, like planting seeds for the garden, anything.
Absolutely.
Well, so do you have issues with increased screen time in your house, or have you found something in particular has worked for you? We'd love to hear your stories or any questions you'd like us to tackle. You can find us on all the main social media platforms. Subscribe to us.
Oh, the irony.
Keep checking, because we're going to say something really important in a minute. You can subscribe to us on places like Spotify, Audible, all of the major platforms, or you can contact us at help@teenagersuntangled.com. Now, Sarah wants us to look at how we can educate our children about healthy eating without giving them an eating disorder. Eating disorders exist throughout history and around the world, but since the 1950s, reports of all eating disorders have increased dramatically, especially in Western cultures. Susie, have you had any experience with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trained as a psychotherapist as well, and I think as a society we do have quite a messed up relationship with the way we eat, and that's become normal. You hear the conversations all the time with parents. Oh, I mustn't eat that. That's naughty. Or I'm on a diet. Or I'm it's just bandied about that that we're fat phobic, basically. That thin is good, fat is bad, and that we're striving towards looking a particular way.
Or being big and muscular for men
is
good.
Yeah, I'm talking about maybe the feminine. Yeah,
yes,
you're absolutely right. Yeah, being big and muscular for men is good, and being looking differently is bad. But it's very black and white, and it's very externally driven, external validation. If you look a particular way, and we discussed this before, teenagers are absolutely in a place in their lives where external validation is bigger than it is in other times of their lives, rightly or wrongly. That's how it works. So we're trying to minimize that. It can be really destructive, because then they think, well, then I'm not good enough if I don't look like that.
Yes, and it bleeds into everything else.
Yeah, and it's really, really time consuming and takes over their lives, basically.
It's an interesting one, because I grew up in a family that ranged from very overweight to obese, and my parents talked all the time about being on a diet. We're going to lose weight. We're going to lose weight. We're going to be thinner. We're going to do this diet. We're going to do that. And to me, it didn't touch the sides, of course, until I became a teenager, at which point I would look at them and think, yeah, but I don't think you eating that thing fits in the diet you've been talking about, and you still haven't lost any weight. So I don't think you're very good at it, but guess what? I think I can do it, because I'm highly competitive. I'm going to be good at it.
Yes.
So I went for the full on, I'm not going to eat.
Yes.
And it didn't end up in a full blown eating disorder of the dangerous type, but it took me until my 30s to really work out what was going on there. And for me, the thing that was a trigger point was a friend who came up to stay. And what had happened was I'd put on the puppy fat because I was turning into a teenager, which is the stuff you get just before you have that big growth spurt. And sometimes it continues, because women are supposed to lay down fat stores to have babies. But of course, everything in social media, or everything even at that time, would tell you that's a terrible thing. Yeah. And my friend said to me, "Oh, you used to be the skinny one, but now you're the fat one." And I wasn't really deeply hurt. I just thought, "Oh, thank you for telling me. God, I need to do something." It's all these salad cream and sandwiches and things. And so for me, what really helped was I actually got into yoga as a teenager. I found a book on it, and every day it talked about a different thing. And one of the key things it talked about was eating food in its closest life force. So things that actually make you, build you up as a human being, are full of nutrients. And that actually started to switch my thinking. It didn't stop me having, eating problems, because I just didn't know how you're supposed to eat.
No.
And just to zoom the clock forward, one of my daughters had a very similar experience. Now, she didn't say there was a trigger point like someone saying, now you're fat. But she said up until about the age of 13, she'd been into a school that was offline pretty much. And she said she never thought once about how she looked. She just thought she looked great. And so did I. And then she suddenly, when she was going to the next school, looked online and said, oh, whoops, I don't look like those people, and panicked.
Yeah.
And lost large amounts of weight. She was never fat by any stretch of the imagination, never overweight. She was just, a normal girl. And it got to the point where I had to say to her, sweetie, if you are not going to eat more, I'm going to have to get the nurse to weigh you on a daily basis. And I know you love your freedom, so we need to talk about this. And we had a lot of deep discussions. And she won't mind me talking about this because it's kind of behind her.
Yeah.
But she said, what should we be doing? Because we're all really scared about giving our kids an eating disorder. So how do we do this? And she said she's surrounded by girls. She can't talk about the boys because she hasn't got boys in her environment. But she said who are all saying, "Oh, I'm really fat," and then they'll starve themselves, and then they get hungry, then they eat pizza and crisps and sweets, and then because they've eaten that, they then punish themselves by not eating breakfast. And she said it's this kind of constant vicious cycle where they keep talking about what they're doing wrong and then punishing themselves, and it becomes a punishment.
Yeah, it's all about control. It's never about the food. And it can just spiral really quickly into an obsession, and then you've got mood swings because you're not eating properly, and based in a context that is, we're all slightly messed up about food already. So there's, where do they go? Where do they look for like normality? And they need, the emphasis always has to be not on what do you look like, but how do you feel? How does food make you feel? And I'm imagining when you did yoga when you were young, which was amazing, you have an awareness of your body from doing yoga. You're very in touch with your body. And if you can feel you're in your body, you are less in your head thinking about these things.
Absolutely.
But you tune into, what does my body need? What does my body want? When am I hungry? When am I full? It's just a more organic way of treating your body.
I think that's
and we've come a long way away from that. So we don't feel comfortable in our bodies. We're in our heads. So we're shoving junk in our bodies because it gives us a hit in another way.
And it's easy because I look around and I think, I can't understand why more people aren't obese. Right. If you go into any supermarket, which is predominantly the way people shop in the UK, and one of the reasons why I try not to shop in supermarkets is because you're literally assaulted from the moment you get in there right up until the tills with fast food that's cheaper and that's a quick hit. And I look at these things and think, well, really, if it was up to my mind as a teenager, I would just basically eat all of that. A teenager and you have an allowance or once you have control, you could buy an entire birthday cake of your own, eat it, and no one's checking. You have this sudden freedom. So what do you do with it? And in a way, our teenagers are being educated about food all the time. There's like nutrition education, which is a very formalized way of doing it, but it's not really hitting home.
No, and because it's addressing what's going on in our heads. It's an intellectual discussion of food, and that's really useful, really good, really helpful, but it's not integrating their bodies. It's not saying like with the, just before we're talking about, being in touch with your body. So do you know when you're hungry? Do you know when you're full? Stop eating. And
of course, I was brought up in an era, and I'm sure you were to an extent, where you had to finish what was on your plate.
Really damaging.
You would be forced to sit there, and my porridge was brought out the next morning if I hadn't finished.
Nice.
I said I didn't want it. My father would put it in the fridge and bring it out the next day.
And there are reasons for people being like that. We live in a very different, different society now where we, abundance of food, ridiculous amount. But well, then maybe taking less. But just tuning into your body. What's your body telling you? I had this conversation with my eldest yesterday because I knew I was doing this, and we were talking about a time when he was pretty in tune with his body. I mean, we have sadly regressed back to eating a lot of junk food because his metabolism is really high because he's growing. He thinks he can eat anything. But he would eat what he would try and tune into what he needed. And occasionally he would go, actually, I really want a big bowl of salad. And I'd be like, falling off my chair going, trying not to react. And because he was actually really tuned into what his body needed. And we forget, as adults as well, we forget to listen. If you're really quiet, if you're really still, your body will tell you what it needs. Your head will tell you what it wants, which is a big cream cake perhaps, but your body will actually tell you what it needs when you're hungry. And we don't know how to tune into that. So mindful eating is a huge area, and it's a really helpful way of getting people to be healthier in their bodies.
And Susie, that's what made all the difference for me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I did it to myself without really thinking about it. I'd ended a relationship and I basically just thought, I'm only going to eat what I really want.
Right, brilliant.
And the weight dropped off me.
Yeah.
There was the stress as well of having finished a relationship. But actually it was much more a reset where I thought, what do I really, really want? And I'll only eat that. So rather than eating my way through an entire fridge to get to the thing that I actually want, I'm just going to eat the thing I want straight away, whatever that is.
Or we eat emotionally, we eat when we're stressed, we eat when we're bored, we eat when we're upset.
Because it's a quick way of dealing with it.
It's a numbing mechanism. It could be alcohol, it could be shopping, it could be anything else. It's a numbing mechanism. We don't want to, something feels uncomfortable, we don't want to feel it. So we eat because it dulls it. But the problem is when we dull the uncomfortable stuff, we also dull everything else.
Everything else.
It's just a mechanism a coping mechanism.
So talking about mindfulness is, I'm 100% behind your message. I think actually that's been everything for me too, even though I didn't know it was mindfulness at the time.
Interesting.
There's a fantastic program that I came across called clementineprograms.com. They've got a section called Mindful Eating Improves Teens' Lifetime Relationship with Food. And I rummaged through that website. If people want to go to it, I recommend it. It's very good. And one of the things they said is that in general, the brain expects meals to take at least 20 minutes. So if you quickly consume food in 10 minutes or less, the brain still thinks you're not done. So there's the speed of the eating. Then also the brain takes into account the flavors of the food, such as sweet or salty, and this concept is known as a flavor point. And there are appetite centers in the brain that activate when a person eats, for example, something salty. And once it's had a little drop of salt in there, it expects to be filled. And if you don't continue filling everything, then you may end up craving.
Gosh, that's interesting.
Continuing to crave, yes. And then there's the mind-gut connection, which really in science we're only just starting to explore properly. Tim Spector, who's the man behind the COVID study in the UK, who's got the biggest twin study in the world, has been looking at food and the relationship with your genes. And he's finding that there are identical twins whose bodies respond differently to the same food.
Amazing.
So it's coming back to what you were saying. It's that we actually have to be individual about this approach.
Yeah.
We need to stop saying, because what happens is we look outside, teens are going to say, so how do I get things? What do I do? So they're looking for information, this diet, that diet, that. There isn't a one size fits all diet at all. And that's what we're really starting to understand. And that also the digestive process is very complex. So if you're doing things while you're trying to eat, it's believe that it'll interrupt that digestion
well, you're
process.
on autopilot from a mindfulness perspective, or you're in autopilot when you're just shoveling in food. And when I teach mindfulness, so we do a practice. It could be with a raisin, or if we're doing a luxury version, it's with a chocolate.
I'll come to that one.
Yeah, it's really fun. And every time people do it, they're amazed. And I use a minstrel. It's like not the best quality chocolate. Yeah, you're wrinkling your nose at that. But that's because it's got a shell and you can put it in your mouth and then crunch it. And then you go, whoa. But every time I do it, people go, wow, that was one chocolate. So what a waste. I had a woman the other day. She was like, oh my God, all the minstrels I've wasted by just shoveling them in. So we slow down and we tune in. We get
that.
out of being an automatic where, you have the classic bag of whatever you're eating, your sweets or popcorn, and you're shoveling them in, and you get to the bottom and you're like, who's nicked them all?
Yeah,
and it was you. Who ate all my sweets? And it was you in autopilot. So we're stepping out of autopilot, getting into our bodies, noticing, and then tasting. And then, you don't need to eat the whole box, because actually if you're actually listening, you'll realize that by chocolate, depending on where your bar is, by chocolate 5 or 6, you feel pretty done with chocolate.
Yes, absolutely. And the portion sizes have changed dramatically.
Yes.
So our concept of what is the right portion size is completely confused. So once again, going back to how your body actually feels and looking at what's going on is important.
Really important.
So, for example, mindfulness eating practices, exactly what you're saying, eliminating distractions when you're eating.
Yeah.
Focus on the food, slow down the meals.
Yeah.
And use your senses when you're eating to feel the texture of the food, smell it, listen to the sounds, taking time to appreciate food, which is why all the way through our teenagers' progress, it's so important that we sit down for meals at some point. It doesn't have to be every meal.
Yeah, yeah. And we don't have to be weird about it and make it like super slow. My dad does that, and my kids, it drives them insane. They said the other day, Mum, we were eating soup and Grandad chewed it 40 times. So you can go like the other way.
That'll be me, no teeth, just trying to chew my soup. Prevention begins with open communication, and it's about encouraging healthy attitudes towards eating. So discussing how diet can affect your health, talking about how it can affect your feelings rather than the way you look. Encouraging the teen to eat when they're hungry. The one thing I did say to my teens, I say, just if you're not hungry, don't eat, and then wait till you're hungry. Don't have someone say to you, oh, you need to eat right now.
Yes.
Because actually what you're doing by making somebody eat when they're not hungry is they're switching off their connection with their body.
Yeah, well, mine do
them.
that often, and they never have to eat if they're not hungry. That is a thing in our house. And actually there was one had a sporting fixture in the morning, and I said, you really do need to have some breakfast. And he stopped and he turned around to me and he goes, what? But we have a thing. I don't have to eat. I'm not hungry. And I was like, oh, that's good point. But if they come for a meal and they're not hungry, then we'll come to the meal anyway, because
come and sit with us. You can drink.
And quite often they take a little portion, or they have it later.
Yes.
It's not a big deal.
But it's about sharing time together.
Yeah.
And Body Project, which was developed by 3 universities, they found that their cognitive dissonance approach encourages girls and women to question the media images that are projected to them about eating and about the way that they should look. And by talking about what is completely normal for a woman and a woman's body can be very therapeutic, and it interrupts the bulimia, anorexia progress.
Yes.
So
there's loads on social media, going back to the digital thing, there's loads of body positive people on social media who are doing amazing things where it's doing exactly what you're saying. It's normalizing normal bodies.
Explaining to your teenager that choosing a diet which excludes things, or, unless they've got allergies, for example, or focusing on one type of food group could compromise their nutrition, and they're building a body. This is important for their future, and setting a good example, not spending all your time worrying about losing weight or because we put this stuff onto our children naturally because we are concerned ourselves, and we come from a different era. And we speak the language that we were given by our parents.
Yes, that's really important.
And having nutritious snacks readily available can really be helpful for teenagers, because teenagers do reach for things mindlessly. So having all of that around can be very helpful. And in my house, because I am lazy, greedy, and I will... I will eat the stuff that's in front of me. I've cleared the cupboards. We don't have crisps in the cupboards and biscuits and chocolates. Right. I mean, we do a little bit, but mostly they're not there.
Oh, you're better than I am.
Well, no. It's because my husband, who's 6'4", I never had to worry about eating at all. Whereas I have had to manage my eating. And my friend calls me a false skinny because, I just don't eat much. But it's all healthy food. Yeah. So I don't want to fill up on crisps, because then I won't feel hungry for good food. And it also changes my taste buds. So I basically stopped buying that stuff. But my husband still wants the crisps and the snacks and things. So he come an evening, will disappear out to his car and come back from his tuck shop, his mobile tuck shop.
That's so funny.
So he buys all this stuff and keeps it in his car. Yeah. And I told my friend about that and she said, oh my God, that's genius. I'm going to make my husband keep all his snacks in the car and then everyone in the house will be in the car with him.
Yeah.
And I can have the house to myself.
That is genius. We hide snacks from my eldest, my daughter and I, because he just eats them all within one evening. and her other brother as well is a massive chocoholic. He thinks he doesn't eat much sugar, but he really does. So we hide them now. And then we can enjoy them later.
So I think really mindfulness is the way to go.
Yeah.
I'm 100%, for me, it was everything about what changed my life.
And awareness.
My attitude. And I have no body issues now at all. I have no issues with my eating.
Amazing.
I'm very comfortable with who I am. And it's all about taking that approach, getting in contact with my body. Now,
I obviously agree.
Yeah. Call Susie. So the pinch points that I saw were natural increases in body fat and weight associated with puberty. So look out for that. Look out for your child going to that. Do not say anything about them putting on weight. But if you start to see that they're panicking about it, try to help them understand that it's about healthy, mindful eating, not
and it's
trying
normal.
to... Yes, and it's normal.
In our culture, it's slightly cruel that nature does that at the time it does, but that's only because we've been messed up with the way we look at bodies.
Yes.
It's actually for biological reasons.
And another one is an increased desire for peer acceptance. If they've joined a new group, they've moved to a new school, that might be a time when it's going to change their view of themselves.
Yeah.
Again, that's happened a lot.
Because their acceptance flags antennae are shouting loud.
Exactly. Onset of romantic interest.
Yes.
Changes in academic expectations. Another one. Depression. And then it's what are they doing? Are they the sorts of people who are competitive like me, who decides they're going to be the best skinny person?
Perfectionism is massively at the root of particularly things like anorexia.
Dancers and athletes. But this applies to boys and girls because boys have different pressures, but they still need the mindful approach to eating.
Yeah.
It's still very important.
Even though it's probably really foreign to them, you can do it in little bits. You can just sort of drip it in slightly. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yes.
Because they probably won't go, oh, yay, let's be mindful and eat. They'll go, Mum, you're weird. What are you doing? But you can drip it in,
If you see extreme weight loss, frequently skipping meals or refusing to eat, excessive focus on food, worry or complaining about being fat, laxative, diuretics, any of this forces the child vomiting, repeated episodes of eating abnormally, any of these sorts of things, you may well be beyond where it can be managed at home, but it is you have got to go in and engage. You do need to have conversations about this. If you're starting to think it's beyond your control, you do need to get some help. Yeah. I bought books. Once again, I always go to the books because there's a lot of really help. But if you're struggling to get help from the NHS or from your own doctor in the country you're in because of either restrictions, money, whatever, books can be. There's some brilliant books out there in terms of helping teenagers with eating issues.
Yeah. And people often panic and go in and start to try and control the food and control the meals. And especially if they've stopped eating, we must get food into them.
Yes.
And that often makes it worse.
Yes, absolutely. That's it for now. In the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about mindfulness, both one-to-ones and courses, you can find Susie on Instagram, and her details are on susieasleymindfulness.co.uk. Next week, we look at a topic raised by a teacher at a school I visited. She said one of the biggest problems they face is teenagers starting something, finding that they're not particularly good at it immediately, and then deciding to stop before they've really given it a chance. I think that's very familiar.
Yes.
And the other big issue, which is the forming of new relationships, and particularly for girls, the toxic friendship groups that can form and the frenemies, bullying with boys. We'll have a conversation about that next week. You've made it to the end of Teenagers Untangled. Well done. By the way, this doesn't even count towards your screen time, so go get it if you want to. From Susie and me, thanks for being here. Goodbye until next time.
Bye-bye for now.